Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm reviewing the automatic vintage lens tool from Hong Kong microbrand TACS. Now the automatic vintage lens tool, as you guys can see, is meant to evoke the lens of a camera, right? So let's start with the specifications. Now first and foremost, the automatic vintage lens tool uses a sapphire crystal. So you see a very nice sapphire crystal here to protect against scratches. Now interestingly, they call this a fish eye sapphire crystal. So let me see if I bring it closer to the camera. You see there's a bit of distortion here. Is meant to mimic the look of a camera lens, the aperture, the refraction that goes into it. So that's quite interesting, but it still retains of course the scratch resistance property of a sapphire crystal. Now in terms of water resistance rating, due to its screw down crown as well as the screwed case back, it actually has quite a decent water resistance rating of 100 meters. So this should be fine in most everyday usage. Just don't bring it into anything that needs prolonged submersion in water. So no going to the pool, no going to the sea with this, but anything else, it should be fine. Now moving on to the movement. Now the automatic vintage lens tool, or AVL II for short, is powered by the automatic Miyota 82 S0 movement, which is unsurprising given that it's one of the only affordable skeletonized movements out there. Now it beats at 21,600 beats per hour, it hand winds, and it has about 42 hours of power reserve. I'm usually not a fan of the 8 series movement. I prefer the Seiko NH35 or NH38 at this price point, because sometimes the 8 series movement has a stuttering seconds hand. But as you guys can see on my model, it does not seem to be an issue here. The hand does not stutter or ticks like a quartz watch. It seems to be fine. So yeah, however, I would have preferred the movement to be a bit more decorated. I would have liked to see a custom rotor here, especially at this price point. There is a bit of decoration. You guys can see some basic Geneva striping on the main plate of the movement, but it still uses the default rotor, and I would like to see a custom tag rotors or some sort of camera inspired rotor maybe. Okay, moving on to the strap itself. Now the strap is actually pretty good. This model comes on a matching black Horween leather strap, and it's just quite nice. Stylistically, the black strap, the black buckle, the black strap loops, they all matches the black case. So you get a very stealthy, very sporty look overall. As you guys know, the Horween is one of the top producers of leather world, right? So their leather are generally quite decent, and the same goes for this strap here. It's also quite thick, as you guys can see, which is great as it offsets the thickness of the watch, which we'll talk about later. There's also quick release spring bars, as you guys can see, so if you want to swap out your straps quickly, that's possible as well. On the whole, I'll say the strap is probably one of the better ones that I've seen at this affordable price point. Now, the AVL II even has lume. There's Super Luminova C3 on the hands and dial and bezel markings. I'll just pop out a lume shot here for you guys to see. So if you guys ever find a need to read the time in darkness, it shouldn't be an issue on the AVL II. Now overall, I would say I'm satisfied with the specifications of the AVL II. There's sapphire crystal, there's a Miyota skeletonized movement, there's 100 meters of water resistance rating, and even a quality Horween leather strap, and even lume. So there's not much to complain about. Nevertheless, let's be real. No one is going to buy this watch because of its specifications. Instead, the unique selling point of the watch is definitely its camera-inspired aesthetics. So in case it isn't evident, the AVL II is modeled after the lens of a camera. So just to bring up a camera lens I have here, so you guys can see how TACS has drawn on the design and aesthetics of a camera lens in the design of the AVL II. So we're putting both of them side by side. One might be hard pressed to tell the difference. So I love how smartly TACS has incorporated the essence of a camera lens here. Of course, you get the same play on shapes. You get the various circles, outer rings, the inner rings. You get a smartly skeletonized center portion of the dial there that mimics the aperture that you find on a regular camera lens. There's also let me bring it closer to the camera so you guys can see. There's also the markings here on the chapter ring of both the dial, as well as some markings on the bezel. Can you guys see that? That of course is reminiscent and is supposed to evoke the similar markings that you will find on the lens itself, that states the specifications, the focal lengths and whatnot. So yeah, I really enjoy the aesthetics of the AVL II. You can tell that TACS has put in a lot of effort in studying the camera lens and thinking to themselves how they can incorporate it, in the design of their watch. Now, I'm not quite sure if it pops out on the camera. Let me bring it closer to the camera. But there's actually, the fisheye lens actually has a play on shapes here. You see how the dial is magnified in a sort of sense due to the fisheye sapphire crystal, and it's quite an interesting visual sight as well. Now, while I do appreciate the markings, on the dial as well as the bezel, like I said, it's supposed to be reminiscent of the markings on the camera lens. So from an aesthetic point of view, I understand that. However, it's not very practical. As you guys can see, there's no dial marking, there's no indices, there's no hour or minute track on the dial. So sometimes I do struggle to tell time, especially due to its scrutinized center. The AVL II, as you guys can see, is not the most legible of watches, I would say. So if legibility is an issue to you, this might not be the watch for you. Sometimes, especially in low light conditions, I do struggle with telling time on this watch in a glance. So for those of you for whom legibility is a concern, do take that in mind. Now, moving on to the bezel itself, as you guys can see, let me show you, there is a bi-directional bezel. Now, there's no clicking sound because this is a sterile bezel. So, unlike a dive bezel, there's no clicks, 120 clicks, 60 clicks, nothing. It's a sterile bezel. Again, this is probably more aesthetic rather than practical. I suppose the brand states that the rotating bezel is supposed to mimic how photographers, adjust the focal lengths of their lenses. Practicality wise, like I said, there's not much practical use to it. You can't tell a second time zone. You can, measure elapsed time. It's simply there for an aesthetic purposes. But if you are a photography enthusiast, which I'm sure this is what the watch is aiming for, its target audience. If you're a photography enthusiast, this is rotating bezel is definitely some like a aspect of the watch, a design aspect of the watch that you appreciate. Now, moving on to the case side. On one side, you see the AVL II watch has a unique serial number to it engraved on the plate. Now, the brand says that you can even engrave your own choice of engraving or personalization here. So, if you're planning to purchase this watch as a gift for perhaps a loved one who really likes photography, you can engrave their name or initials here as well. On to the crown side, you see we get a brush. Let me see. Let me bring this closer to the camera a bit. You can see the brush case. This particular version that I chose is in what they call dark matter. So you guys see like a very stealthy brush metal look throughout. I chose this because most of my cameras, in fact I think most cameras out there are black and have the same black brush aesthetic. So the AVL II, this model in black, in dark matter specifically, really reminds me of a black camera lens, right? Or a black DSLR. The crown itself is signed, as you guys can see. The crown itself is signed with the TACS logo. I'm not quite sure why they chose to put this here, like BPH, bits per hour 21600. It refers to the bit rate of the Miyota movement inside. I think this is superfluous. I would have preferred them to omit it here, but we do get a nicely sized crown. You can see that this is polished as compared to the brush case, so we do get a bit of contrast in textures here as well. Now the crown is screwed down, like I mentioned earlier, for that water resistance rating. So you have to unscrew it, wind it. As you guys can see, it winds really well. Because it's substantially sized, so it's very nice to hand wind. Yeah, and you just screw it back in. Onto the Caseback. It is a Spartan Caseback. You guys see, there's a bit of specifications and relevant information involved. Let me bring it closer to the camera here, which is only visible in certain angles. So you get a vintage lens and some relevant specifications, an exhibition Caseback for you to see the mechanical movement within, which I think is smart given how the automatic vintage lens, the name itself, is supposed to be reminiscent of some of the vintage or mechanical viewfinder cameras out there. So given the mechanical components and aspect of vintage cameras, it makes sense to have the mechanical aspect of this watch here on display. As I mentioned earlier, we get a screw now Caseback as well for the added water resistance rating. Alright, now let me just put this on the wrist and show you guys how it wears. Alright, here's a wrist roll of the watch. So as you guys can see, the AVL II is quite a bulky watch. Case dimensions is 47 millimeters wide, so this is definitely one of the biggest, if not actually the biggest watch that I've reviewed thus far. On my 7-inch wrist, I think is right at the maximum of what I can accommodate anymore, and the lugs will be protruding from my wrist. So it is quite a heavy and bulky watch. If you have smaller wrist, this might not be the one for you. It's quite thick as well, as you guys can see. This is considering the bezel, including the bezel, is 16 millimeters thick. So this is not a watch that will slide underneath a shirt cuff as well. So if you're planning on purchasing an office watch, again, this is not for you. It wouldn't pair well with office wear. But if you're a photography enthusiast, you have larger wrists, or you simply have a preference for larger watches, Panerai watches, your dive watches, this might be right in line with your taste. Now, to sum up, I do think that the TACS AVL II is a must-have for photography enthusiasts. The watch encapsulates the spirit of photography in every aspect of its design. It has solid specifications too, with a build quality that should last you for quite some time. While the watch is not exactly inexpensive, so this particular version, this dark matter version on the leather strap, costs 569 USD retail price. While it's not exactly inexpensive, the AVL II is still relatively affordable, given some of the other photography inspired watches out there, such as the Leica L1 and L2 watches. The biggest stumbling block, I think, would be the chunky 47 case diameter of this watch, as well as its bulky 16mm thickness. Like I said, if you have smaller wrist, or if you have like a preference for smaller watches, this might be too big for you. But if you happen to be passionate about photography, and if you have a preference, if a large wrist or preference for larger watches, then the AVL II is the perfect watch for you. For those interested in purchasing this watch, the AVL II, you can use the promo code Shiok to enjoy 10% off all TACS watches online. After the discount, the AVL II, this particular dark matter version in a leather strap, will cost 521 USD, or about 693 Singapore dollars. Now, given the masses and throngs of positive reviews online, I'm clearly not the only one that enjoys this watch. And again, I think it's one of the more unique watches that we reviewed thus far. If you're planning to get one for yourself, if you're a photographer, or if you know of a photographer friend or a loved one, then this would be a perfect gift for. I highly encourage you to give this watch a shot. Alright, and that's it for today. If you enjoyed the review, do subscribe to the channel, to leave this video a like. That really mean a lot to me. As always, there'll be another review out tomorrow, so see you guys then. Ciao.